All right, welcome everybody to the webinar about perspectives from a journeyman estimator. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, whether you're a PrebuiltML user or an Estima user. Looking forward to spending some time with Bryan, who will be joining us in just a few moments. Just learn some tips and tricks and how you can be better users of the software. My name is Adam. I've been working with PrebuiltML with the software mostly since its beginning, actually. Just helping direct the flow of dev efforts, helping with support, and just different things along the way. And so I'll be kind of hosting the session today, and we'll be joined in here by Bryan. But before I introduce him, just want to point out a couple of tools that are available to you along the way. One of them in particular is the Q&A tool, the question answer tool that's in your webinar controls. You'll probably see it down near the bottom of your viewing panel. And if you can click on that, that should just actually pop out as a separate window you can set off to the side. And the format of our meeting today is we're first of all going to spend some time jumping around to a few different topics and specific areas in the program, and seeing Bryan's perspectives on those different areas. But then we'll also be taking Q&A from you guys, because the goal and the hope for this is that this is relevant to you guys and helping you be better in the software. So maybe a couple different types of questions that you might ask. One would just be ones that are relevant to what we're discussing at the time, and we'll maybe try to answer some of those even real time as we go through the webinar. But also, feel free to already be typing in or thinking of questions that are not necessarily topics that we covered, but you just want to get a journeyman's estimator's perspective on how would you handle this type of situation, or how do you use this particular feature, or so on. So think of those and find that question and answer section and type those in there, and we'll leverage that throughout the webinar. But with that, I want to introduce Bryan. Bryan works for our related service division that provides takeoff services for people actually throughout the nation. We have customers all nationwide. Bryan's been doing takeoffs for about 12 years, has literally done millions of square feet of takeoffs in that time. And in case for those of you who wondered, Bryan's experience isn't just limited to the PrebuiltML / Estima software that we might be talking about here, but he's used other platforms as well. So his experience is relatively broad, and he comes with different perspectives. So Bryan, thanks for taking the time today to join in with us here.
Hey, good to be here. And hopefully everybody's able to pick up some good stuff today. Just in starting out, I would like to let everybody kind of know how I run the software. This might look a little differently than when you open the software, and that's because I run mine in classic mode. For my own personal preference, I like the way it looks better. I also run my crosshairs on, and I run my snap to grid off. Those are all available here in the tools and settings. Cursor draw mode is on as opposed to auto or off. I do not have snap to grid by default, and I'm running classic mode. Those are computer settings. So once you set it, it's going to remember for that computer how they're set. It's not tied to the template in any way.
Sounds good. So as we get started here, I'm going to one of the areas that we wanted to talk about first relates to presets. So what are presets? And I'm just going to, on my screen here, just going to point out just the general concept of them. So the idea with presets is that unlike when you go up here to the top toolbar and you click a starting tool and you start to draw it, and it just shows up as a generic line, which then you have to then go and set up and configure all the different settings for it with the header, the application, the product, and so on. But if there's materials that you draw on a regular basis that you want to make use of throughout your different jobs, you can create presets for them. So for example, here's a beam that I've drawn, and if I right click on it, I can see a lot of the properties have already been set. whether or not it's flush, whether or not the product is what the product is, the plies, the application, and so on. And I can come down here to this item that I've drawn and choose to save it as a preset. So I'll select that option, and I'll call this my my microlam preset. So I'll say that there, click OK. And now when I come up to my segment tools, instead of left clicking on it, I'm going to right click, and I'll get the options for the different presets I've created, including that microlam preset. When I go to draw it, you'll notice that I not only have drawn the item, but it also comes in with all of that preset information about the application, the product, and so on. So that's the concept of presets, is just allowing you to move more quickly through your project by letting you leverage the things that you use on a regular basis. But I'll also point out that unlike, or I shouldn't say unlike, the presets are not limited to just the takeoff tools. You can also use presets for other things as well, like the markup items, for example. So simple case in point would be highlighter. If you make use of the highlighter or the clouding tool, and you have it set up a particular way that you enjoy, that just makes it easier for you to distinguish things. For example, I could set this color to be green, and then I could choose to save as preset and create a green highlighter preset, so it's just easier for me to use different colors and move more quickly through places where I want to mark up. So with that, that's the concept of presets. But so Brian, how do you make use of presets, and where do you see them being effective?
Yeah, I use presets on every job. They just like to touch on, first of all, if there's kind of, more general ways to use presets and then more specific ways. And since I do jobs all over the United States, I don't use a lot of super specific ones, just because from job to job, the same preset isn't going to be useful. But then, as a for instance, you can have a 2-ply header that just comes in as a 2-ply header, no material set, because in this market maybe we often use 2-ply headers, 2-by headers, or what have you. But then I have one customer where their go-to header is a double 2x10. So in their template can have a double 2x10 header, where when I'm going to draw a header, I just and go on from there with the product and everything already filled in. So anywhere that you can set that up, so that way the things that you're using all the time, you can skip the steps of, I need to put a product to this. Well, no, just go ahead and set one up that has the product in it. Touching and running through the different tools and some different ways to leverage the presets in them. With the count, one of the main ways to try that or to use that is for things like a post. And you can have a generic, it's just a post with a link to it, or I can have, well, I want a 10-foot 8x8 porch post right here. And so I can have that set up as a preset porch post, treated 8x8, 10-foot long, and it's all set up and ready to go. Other things you can use the count for is like caps and bases. If there's caps and bases that you use often, just as your general call outs, you can set those up where you can just grab it quickly and put it in. Other things to use for the line segment besides the header is, for instance, a porch beam. I've got a 6x10 porch beam here where I can just click on that, draw it in. I would recommend that you'd only do presets for like the things that are the most common, as far as just having it in your template that way. Obviously, you can make some specific presets for a job that you're working on. But I would recommend that you don't put a lot of presets that are too specific in all of your templates, just because as that preset list gets longer and longer, you're going to start to lose the benefit of the speed of just having a couple clicks to get your product, or if you have to scroll through a long list to find the preset that you want, you're losing some of that time savings. The linear tool, there's not a lot of places that you probably would find to use that, but one preset that I have for my linear tool is for a situation like this where I have this pony wall. That's a shear wall, and often we need to call some diaphragm blocking in the joist bay when there's a shear wall there. And so rather than trying to go and draw in the pieces of blocking by hand or just keying it in, I have a preset here where I can have a 16-inch piece of diaphragm blocking every 4 foot down this wall. And you can see that it drops in a piece of blocking length of 16 inches, and it shows up as just a lineal footage over here that I can then put on a product and put it in my list. And obviously, you could already have a product set for that as well. Moving on to area, the big place where I use presets in areas is with siding. I can have some different siding types in here, and I can say, well, I have one of my more common ones is 8 1/4 Hardy, and so I can just click my preset and draw my siding. I already have the application and the product set right there. For the floors and roofs, those are a little more similar, where for this one I have my 2x10 floor decking and rim already applied, and I can just go and draw this floor container in, and it's going to have my joist, it's going to have my spacing, it's going to have my decking. Just clean up a little bit, and all of your products are there ready to be linked. The roof is a similar situation to the floor, but a place you could use that is common roof pitches. You could have a different preset for, say, your 612 or your 412 or 812, whatever common pitches you have that you run into a lot. And of course, a preset is sometimes just a good starting place, or maybe I have my preset for a double 2x10 header, but I need a triple 2x10 at one opening. I can still use the double preset and just add apply quicker than I could draw a 3-ply header from scratch. Another thing to keep in mind as you're using presets is utilizing that default pack functionality. I'm sure that you're all familiar with that, but when you're doubling up using the default pack and a preset, it can really save you some time getting your material into the list.
Yeah, so continuing on from there into perhaps a related topic in some senses, and that's hotkeys. So again, looking at my screen here, I'm going to go to the Tools tab and come to Settings, is where this would be found at. And of course, here the user settings, this would be where, as Brian mentioned before, where you can make some of these changes, adjust the modern theme and so on if you want. But then there's another tab here at the top that's called Hotkeys. And if we go to that, we'll note a few things. First of all, there's a list of all the different functions that can be controlled with a hotkey. So the idea is that as you are working on a project, instead of having to use the right-click menu or to go all the way up to the toolbar at the top of the screen, you could just use your non-mouse hand on the keyboard to activate a particular tool that you need. So you can see in here in the hotkey section that some of these are filled in already for you. They come with defaults. And then you'll notice that there are some that are blank. So those ones that are, the ones that are blank are ones that you could choose to assign a key to and make active. So for example, if we come down to this set framing orientation line, right now it's set to F12, which actually I'll note that that actually is not a default setting. It actually is blank by default. But I've set it up here to be F12, and might be something that you want to do as well. But I'm going to click into this field, and I'm just going to hit the delete key. And when I do, that F12 setting goes away. I can make use of F12 now in another field instead. Or come back in here, click to that location, and hit F12 to put that particular command back in. So the whole idea with hotkeys is being able to leverage them for speed and just being effective in the program. So Brian, I assume you use, or I know that you use hotkeys. So how would you encourage people to, which ones to use and which ones that you find more useful than others?
Well, I'll tell you which ones I use the most often, and some of them I use it almost as second nature now. I'm not even thinking about it. But starting out, there is hotkeys set up already that will let you activate any of your Digitizer drawing tools. And I use a couple of those often. One of them is F3, which activates the line segment. I use that a lot for drawing walls. And I prefer, just as a side note, using the line segment to the linear tool for drawing walls. And that's just because I can double click rather quickly at a corner, where a linear tool, you don't have to click once. But if I need to go back and change something, if I missed a wall height change, I need to go back and change it. It's a lot easier to adjust walls that are drawn with line segments than it is to adjust walls that are drawn with linears. But anyway, F3 gets you the line segment. Come back over here and show you, another one I use is F5 if I'm doing a siding. Not sure what I'm going to call it yet, but I want to go ahead and capture the square footage. You can hit F5, that grabs your area tool, and you can just take off with that. Let's see, another one would be Control D. That is one that's in the Digitizer. Will let you see, I have my, it basically does the same as clicking, as right click and draw more sections like it. But if I just click on that, hit Control D on my keyboard, I can pick up that same area and start drawing another one over here on this face of the house. Saves anytime that you can save some mouse clicks or movement like that, it'll add speed. Even if it's not a lot, compounded over a job, it can add up, and it also can improve your flow speed as well. F12, one that Adam mentioned, it's very handy when you're doing particularly roofs that use hips, where there's no way to draw that roof, so that way your rafters are running the right direction. With that hotkey set, instead of having to right click and find your set framing orientation line, you can just click on that, hit your hotkey, trace your rafter, and your rafters or joists or whatever are aligned. That can really increase your speed if you're drawing a whole roof. You can just go and draw all the different faces of the roof with your roof tool, and then come back and set all the alignments afterwards. It'll be a lot faster to get to the end of that roof than if you draw each one to then set the rafter layout, and then draw the next one and then set the layout, etc. From the list side, there's some hotkeys I use over here. One of the big ones is Control E, which, just to show that to you, here I have my header 4x12, and let's say that I need to draw this header on more than one page, and so I've got my one line item and I want to do another one. Now if you hit Control D here, it will duplicate your application, but if you notice, if I hit Control D as in dog, well, that's going to delete it. Don't want to do that. If you get Control Shift D, it'll duplicate, but if you hit Control E as in Edward, it'll actually copy that application with the product, so that way I don't have to go back into my product picker and pick the same product again. Utilize that one quite often. Another thing here is linking, unlinking, measuring, using those instead of coming up and clicking the button. I use the hotkeys for those often as I'm tying things to and from the Digitizer to my list. One thing I would mention here as well is I have a Logitech gaming mouse that has programmable buttons on it for my thumb, and I do have Enter and Escape programmed as thumb buttons on my mouse, as I tend to use those a lot as I'm clearing menus or dropping or closing Digitizer tools and things of that nature. There is one more thing I'd like to show you, and that is with the product picker. We'll come into this header application, and let's say that I would like to call a 3.5-inch timber strand for a header. So instead of typing 3.5 and trying to remember, do I need inch marks? Yes, I need inch marks. Do I need a space? Maybe. No. Yes. What I'll do instead is I'll utilize the asterisk key, and that acts as a wildcard where you can look for unique sets of characters in the whole product string. So I can type in 3.5. I'm going to do a 9.5. If I actually type 9.5, then timber strand, and I can filter all the way down to that by using the asterisk to skip inch marks, X's, spaces, etc. So that is something that I use a lot. If you can master it, it'll really speed you up as you're moving through the product picker.
Yeah, do you mind just showing them that one more time, just so it was maybe another product, just because I think there's a lot of value there for those who are willing to master it.
Sure. I will actually add another application here. Let's do a 5 1/8 by 12 glue lamb. Once again, I just put an asterisk between 5 1/8 and 12, and it filtered down to just 3 items. Another thing you can do is, so maybe you can identify even fewer things, like maybe I want 1 3/4 by 11 7/8 microlamb. So I can just type 4*8*M, and that's MI, and that's going to cut me down to just 11 7/8 and 18-inch microlambs. And I got that with 6 keystrokes.
Great, cool. So going back to something that Bryan said there in relationship to his mouse, so he was talking about a programmable mouse. So here's just kind of an example of what one looks like. We don't sell these, obviously, so we're not really pushing our own ship here. But we just find that for many producers that if you're willing to get one of those and learn to use it a little bit, that can really help your production by having some of those buttons available to you that you can program the way that you want them. Just want to touch briefly on a question that came in from the audience in relationship to presets, of how do you get presets into your default template? And that's a great question, because presets can be useful, kind of job specific, so you could be used that way, but even more so that they're set up for your default template. So there's a couple ways you could do that. One, you could just go into your template file and just create some in there, and then ultimately delete those pages or whatever. But perhaps the even better solution is just in a different job file, create those presets. And then if you come over to the Profile tab, over here on the left-hand side of your screen, and then up in the top, there's the Presets tab. And at the top, then here will be all of the different presets that you may have created. So here are these ones. And then at the top, you'll notice that there is import and export buttons. So you could choose to export out the ones you've created. You could even just select which ones that you do or don't want to include. And then you could then go to your default template and import those as well. And there's a few other pieces of functionality back here of just choosing setting defaults and things that you might want to explore also. But then going on from there, so some miscellaneous, back to the digitizer. So we've talked about hotkeys, presets, and things. But just some maybe miscellaneous tips and tricks that make things better. So when we are doing training classes, and one of the things that can especially be useful for users, they find is when they want to operate or act on more than one member at a time. So for example, this beam that I have right here, it's currently set to 2 plies, as well as the rest of these down here. If I wanted to act on and change all of those to a 3-ply member, I could just go to them individually, but of course that would be tedious. But instead, I could come over here to the takeoff items list, and I'll just click on this line item so they become all selected. So you can see I have them all selected here in the digitizer. And I'm going to hold down my control key on my keyboard, and then right click while I'm holding control. And you're going to see that I get a little bit different menu. At the top it says that I have 4 line segments selected. So now I can actually operate within this menu on all of those at the same time. So I could choose to set these to all be 3-ply. And whether that's plies, whether it's product, whether it's lots of different actions you may want to take on an item, just by holding down Control and right-clicking, you can act on the entire group. So there's just a simple trick that many people find useful, and it's almost essential to really be using the program effectively. But beyond that, Bryan, what are some of the tricks that you have and you use in the Digitizer that make your life easier?
Well, one of them is when drawing siding or sometimes floor, ceilings, things of that nature, it can come in handy, is using the box draw mode. And basically what that is you hold down Shift on your keyboard as you activate the drawing tool. And that only works for areas, floor tools, or roof tools. In this instance, I'm going to grab my 8 1/4 hardy plank preset, but I'm going to hold Shift as I left click to select it, and that toggles me into box draw mode where I can draw this in just a couple of clicks. I can draw the whole face as a square. And since we're here on siding, and you might wonder why I split this up, but this particular project, part of it is at an angle to another, which that's another trick that we have here, where since this is at a 45-degree angle, that's the same as a 12-12 pitch. I can change my pitch on this siding to a 12. That adjusts the square footage to compensate for the angle that it's at. Now, the one thing to be aware of as you're using that is if we go to this other elevation, we can see that same side that we did on the other page, and you don't want to be double calling your siding as you go. Another useful tool is splitting a segment. And one place where that can be used is, I'll just show you here, I have this porch beam. It's an 8 by 12. It's 3 sections, but I'm going to go ahead and draw it all as one piece. And the reason I'm doing that is because when I make my layout, I like everything to look good. And so if I draw this one and I stop and I start and I draw my next one, there's a possibility that they won't be lined up perfectly. But if I draw it all as one piece, I can right click in the middle of this post and I can click split segment. And that splits the line segment right there over the post. And sometimes you miss it and you have to adjust. But you can keep everything all lined up, draw a long piece, split it up as needed. Another aspect of splitting, I'll show you over here. I've got 2 by 12 floor joists drawn over this whole floor. You can see that they are in excess of what you can typically get a 2 by 12 in. And what you can do is use a line segment, draw it over this drop beam, and you could set this line segment to be blocking if you want. It doesn't necessarily have to have a product in it for this to work. But I'm going to right click on it, set my condition to drop split. And when I set it to drop split, there's a new section of the menu that shows up that has a split overlap. And so I can set an overlap of 12 inches at that point, so my 2 by floor joist split and lap at that drop beam. And I can repeat that here and here, and it'll split them as that processes. Another thing that I do a lot on jobs, and some people might not think this is a big deal, but coming back to this page, this is my basement walls, but it also shows my main floor framing. And I don't like to draw my floor on top of the walls just because it makes the page very busy, and I know I can turn it off, but I don't like having a whole lot of things over here that go in different packs. So what I will do is I will right click here in the page view and I will make a copy of the page. And that way I can draw my walls on this page, and then on the copy page I can draw my floor system. The scaling and everything transfers over, and it just helps me keep better organized and keep the pages a little cleaner as I do a job. Another thing, and you'll see if there's ways that you can find to leverage this, but using copy and paste in roofs This is handy in places like this where you have like a turret that's symmetrical, or like dormer roofs, things of that nature. What you can do is I've drawn a couple of faces of this roof, but instead of going and drawing each piece individually, I'm going to multi-select these two by holding Control as I click them. And you can use the hotkeys for copy and paste, but I'm going to use the buttons just for this example. I'm going to copy, paste, I'm going to take my registration point. I'm just going to set it off here. And I'm going to now rotate that. And then I'm going to move it. And I'm going to grab that piece and pull it right back in here. And now with that still selected, I'm going to grab these as well. And this time I'm going to use the hotkeys for copy, paste, set it here. I'm going to do a vertical flip and a horizontal flip. I'm going to use that move command again to move that back up here. And I've got the whole 8 sides drawn rather quickly, and much more quickly than if I had to draw each piece individually. There's one other thing that I'll point out here just as miscellaneous tips that I usually do when I'm starting off. One of the first things I do is I take this bookmark section, and if you notice it has that fly out, which means it can be rearranged, and I take it and I stick it on top of my takeoff items. And then I tap back so takeoff items is on top. I do this it gives me a little bit extra space over here as this fills up with items, gives me a little more room to work with. And then I don't know if anybody has noticed when you click to an unskilled page and back to a skilled page, sometimes this bounces. And if you have it stacked like this, it won't bounce at all. Everything will hold to its shape there. I think Adam's mic is muted here.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Yeah, I didn't get my mic muted. So yes, and thank you for that, Brian, with the arrangement of plans, or your plan windows and so on. So going on from there, actually, that same concept and expanding that into the rest of the program, you'll remember that for those of you who use the software, that you can drag out the plan tab to make it entirely separate. So some of you, as far as components go, you're just used to just almost operating entirely in the plan tab and just doing everything from here and setting it back to the packs where it belongs. But over here on the project tab on the list side, this is of course where all of these materials get stacked to, and there's other options that Brian will touch on here in a minute that you can use in these different areas of back in the list and enter things directly. So there's the list side over here, there's the plan side over here. And so what is, for you, Brian, what is the workflow that you find? How do you arrange things, and how do you leverage the fact that you can have both of these things showing at the same time?
I have my setup with multiple screens, and I've undocked here the plan tab from the list project, so that way you can kind of see how I work it. But I kind of go back and forth between the two as I'm working. So for instance, over here, I'm going to draw some of these other basement walls. So I'll come to my basement, I'll get my warm wall, I will measure from here, which takes me back to the digitizer where I'll draw these walls. And then since I'm in the digitizer, since I already drew this wall earlier, I would either, grab my line segment, draw that furring wall, grab it. When I come back to my list, I can then link it, pick up the next wall I'm going to draw, and go back over and continue to draw. You can do that with the floor system as well, whether it's going back and forth with beams or floor joists, things of that nature. Using multiple screens is kind of a big help, because you can have this list pulled up on one screen, you can have your digitizer full screen on the other screen, and you can kind of work your way down through the list Sometimes it'll be a help to remind you, oh, I need to look and see if I need any of, you know, straps or things like that as you're going through. Let's see. Another thing that you can do here, since we're in the list, is in my wall pack, I want to put in some extra bracing and framing so that to brace my walls up. And instead of trying to go and draw a whole bunch of bracing and link it to the list, you can just come in here and key in, say I want 30 16-footers to go out with my first wall pack, so that way they can use that for bracing. You can just key it in. You can key in headers, beams. If you're doing, say, a 20 by 30 garage and maybe you don't have plans for it, somebody just wants a 20 by 30 garage, or you're just trying to do it real quick and don't want to scan in a plan, you can come in, pick your garage height. We'll say we have 10-foot sidewalls on a 20 by 30 garage. That's 100 foot of wall. Just type it in and your material is there. It doesn't necessarily have to be linked. Let's see. Another thing using the multi-select that Adam was talking about that I thought I would mention is, see this page, I've got siding products, some trim siding products all drawn here. You can actually utilize that multi-select to click on different items, either here in the takeoff items, or you could box select over it in the digitizer. But I'm going to hold down Control and click these line items of siding products. I've got applications, I've got products, they're just not linked. Then while I hold down Control, I'm going to right click over here to access that multi-select menu, and I'm going to choose the Move To Exterior Trim, and all of that product is going to be linked up that quickly instead of going line by line to assign it to a pack. With dealing with siding, another little tip or trick that's in here is if you go to your Quick Check tab, you can actually hit this button here, and once you have siding in there, it'll give you the total square footage of all the siding that you have linked to your list. And I use this on every job that I'm doing the siding. I get my siding all drawn, and I come here and check my square footage, and then I just come back and I key it in for my house wrap. That way I don't have to go through and add up all my square footages from all the siding. It does that automatically and tallies it all for you.
Thanks, Brian. So and maybe just to pause here or to answer another question that we had from the audience, and I'll let you maybe field this one, Brian, if we can address it quickly. And that is a relationship to, I think it's probably a follow-on from your split segment demonstration that you had done earlier. But the question is it possible to split a hip or valley rafter? So there's obviously could be different tools that somebody might use for that, but how would you answer that question?
Yes, you can. It'd be very similar to how we did the porch beam. Let's just say, well, yeah, let's just say that for whatever reason, we did not want to send an 18-footer. Maybe this is a larger roof and we've got one that's 24 foot long. You just have to come down that line of your hip or valley rafter to where you want it to split. Once again, put your mouse right where you want the split to be and right click. And then in that, let's see, I did not get my valley rafter, hip rafter there. You right click in it and you'll get that when you, wherever you right click, that's where it's going to act on, but you just pick that split segment out of your right click menu on the item that you're wanting to split, and it'll split it right at that spot that you right clicked.
Yeah, and I think in a similar fashion, like right there, you have the container edge. So if somebody was using the container edge, they could also choose to add a node as well if they were using that for their hip or valley rafter in the corner. So that would be, depending on what tool you're using, you'd be able to do it that way. So then, yeah, going on to the next area that we wanted to jump to was the Publish tab. So Publish tab is another feature that we added in just to help producers who are doing this on a regular basis, you know, not just 1 or 2 times a week, but actually like all day, every day, knowing that they're putting out a lot of jobs, and that when they get to the end of the job, have to create a bunch of output files, you know, a PDF of this, an Excel sheet of that, the PDF of the layouts, or whatever it is that your particular customers or your salespeople are wanting. So we've created the Publish tab with the idea that you can set this up one time in your default template file, so that when you come to the end of the job, all you need to do is be able to click a specific button, click it one time, and then all of your files are produced. So there's kind of a quick overview of the Publish tab. So Bryan, how do you use the Publish tab, and how much value do you get from it?
I use it on every single job, and the benefit that we have found from it is, instead of trying to keep track of which files each particular customer wants, we can set that up in their template where we have the correct file types, the correct file formats, named the way they want, and it's all kept track of. Don't have to look it up. So when you just click the Publish button, it outputs all of those files right there next to your job file. A couple of other things that are useful here, and we do use with some customers, is there is some things that you can put in brackets that go back to the other parts of the project, where, like, I can just type project in here with brackets. Well, it'd be helpful if I use the correct brackets. And let's say I want to put the tracking number in there as well. And when I do that, the project name and tracking number from the General tab are going to be added to this file name when it outputs. So you can have this nomenclature saved in your template, and whatever is put into that General tab is going to go on the output files. There's a list here of the different things that you can do. You can have, you know, your list name, the title of the report, which is here, the date it's printed, name of your project, and tracking number, like I already mentioned, and all of those things can be automatically added to your file names. Another place where this does come in handy is for those of you who are using the point of sale system here, where you can have the file going out of here in the right format, and you can change where it's saved to. You can have it change in a local drive or somewhere like that, where you're putting it in the shared folder on the shared drive where the point of sale system needs it to be in order to consume that file. And so when you hit publish, the pricing piece and everything just goes out and is ready to be utilized.
Very good. Yeah. So there's one other area that we're going to touch on here in just a second, but I also want to again remind people, people have been using the question and answer feature. That's great. But just we're going to do one more little section here, but then going to open it up more to some Q&A. So if you have a question that you would hope that we might be able to address to the audience of how Bryan handles certain situations or whatever, go ahead and type that in there. But one of the questions that actually was asked that I'll just touch on and answer to is the question was, is there a way to build a window/door trim package? For example, give head and sides and sill lengths under one pack to align with the schedule. So I'm going to answer that question with it depends. And it's related to this next feature that we're going to talk about, which is kits. So I'm going to just pull over to my screen here just for a moment. So over here on the list tab, and Bryan will talk about some of this in a moment again, but there are things in the program that we call kits. So you can see these little items that are here underneath floor joists that are indented. Those are driven by or caused by kits. And over in the profile tab, we have a whole kits tab that's set up that you can create and manage kits. The idea is you'd be able to call one item, a parent item, and have that drive other products. And incidentally, we're having this year, or not this year, we're having this week, another webinar that's geared entirely toward how to use kits, how to make them, how to create them. And I'm gonna, right now in your chat window, which is separate than the Q&A section, I just put a link in to, as a registration link to that webinar. So if you're interested in learning more about how to use kits, or if you already use them, maybe how you could take them to a deeper level and do more with them, then be sure to sign up with that. But I guess with that, Brian, what do you do for kits? How do you use them? What are just some overview thoughts about them?
Yeah, so like Adam mentioned, there's different layers, I guess you could say, to the kits, and some we use all the time are going to be things like your floor joist, where when we're calling our floor joist, it's automatically giving us glue. So, you don't absentmindedly forget to send glue with the job. It's already there. It's not something that you have to remember. Another place where that comes in is a place like with siding. It's going to be pulling in caulking already. Then there's kits that are a little more involved, requires some input. One of those is like this fascia kit here. I have 180 foot of fascia, and it's giving me the soffit framing in order to frame in my closed soffit. That's the way this kit is built up. And then I can, just depending which my overhang is, I can put in a soffit product, and that would populate. I can also put in a freeze board. And these are adjustable on the fly. So maybe I need a 3-step freeze. And so I'm going to add a couple more lines of the freeze board. And so that way, every time, if I'm adjusting my fascia at all, maybe I missed a spot, it's going to update all the measurements that are driving from it, being the soffit framing, all the pieces of freeze, and all of that. Using these kits can really increase some speed, because if you notice, there's R's here. This R, I'm in the roof pack, but I don't want my soffit to go. I don't want my freeze board to go with the roof, but I can send these products to a different pack, and that's where they're going to show up. So you can have, everything from some of your roof flashing, siding material, and everything else all running off of one measurement that you drew in your roof. And so instead of having to go remeasure or go key that measurement in other places, it's taking that one number and putting the correct products to it, and then putting those products where they need to go. So if you have the time to jump on that kits class and learn how to leverage those better, that would be really beneficial, I think, to your speed.
Great, yeah, and I put that down near the bottom of your viewing area. I just put that link there in the chat section again, so you should be able to right-click on it, I think, and copy and paste that link, and if you're interested in joining in with that class. So yeah, I want to jump to maybe a couple other just question answer things here at the end. So if you have some, you can type those in. But another one that came in that, Brian, I'll let you answer, and that is when the question is when I draw using the floor tool and hit escape too soon, and I need to be able to draw more of the pack to finish it, how can I continue drawing that same floor pack?
Yeah, I'll show that here real quick. So I'm going to grab my preset again for this floor, and I'm going to start drawing, and I'm going to get to here, and then I'll hit escape. So there's a couple different ways to do it. One of it is you can right click on this edge, you can add a node, and you can drag that node out. But my preferred way is right clicking on that edge and you picking this here, continue drawing container section. That's different than the draw more segments or sections like it. It's continue drawing this container section. When you click that, it reactivates that container. And so you can go on and continue to add how many ever nodes that you would like up until you're finished.
Good deal. Then another thing that I thought might be worth touching on, Brian, would be just approach to a project. Certainly there's different ideas to how, what direction do you approach a project from, or what should you do first, or what should you leave to later? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, the way I approach it, and I did frame before I started doing takeoffs. So the way I approach it is just like I was building the project. I start with whatever goes in the project first, whether that's stuff in the crawl space, main floor system, or if it's a slab, you know, starting with the first walls. And I work as it would be built all the way up until we're doing the siding, we're putting in insulation or drywall, or however far that project is going in the takeoff. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way or even the best way to do it. That's how it makes sense to me. That's the way I do it. I've got a coworker where he approaches the project about opposite of how I do. He starts and does the siding first, and he kind of works all the way down from the siding to the foundation. So it's just kind of however it makes more sense to you. But for me, it makes, as I'm thinking through it and making sure I don't leave out things, that's my process, as I start and do it start to finish as it was being built.
Yeah, makes sense. And so as we think about just starting to wrap this thing up here, I know it can be difficult sometimes to adopt new features or to get yourself out of maybe your habit, but I know you, Bryan, you've been around with the software for quite a while, so you've certainly gone through different feature changes, you know, new alternatives that are available. So for you, how important has it been, and maybe how difficult has it been for you to get over those hurdles, you know, adopting new features that you weren't necessarily used to before? What are some of your thoughts that you might encourage users today in with that?
Yeah, so obviously nobody really likes change, and it can be difficult. I have done my best to be as early of an adopter as possible when new features came out, especially those that you can look at and say, yeah, that makes sense, that would speed things up, even if it's not something that you're comfortable with and it's a little bit more of a struggle or stumble the first few times. The more I focus on trying to make sure that you do it that way, it'll become more natural. And I found that after a week or two, that's about what it would take me in order, if I really focused on changing how I did it, where that speed would start to come back. And ultimately then it was often faster, because the new way of doing it is faster once you get used to it. It's just that little bit of a transition period. So definitely it's worth the pain to adjust things if there's a faster way or a better way, a shorter way to do it.
Yeah, it makes sense. So yeah, I'd encourage all of you, as even if there's just one thing that you saw in the webinar today that you pondered and thought, well, maybe that actually could be useful to me. I could maybe make some headway there and get some more speed. You know, grab onto that one and see where you can apply it. Well, thank you all for taking the time to join in today to the webinar, and hopefully that you found some useful tips along the way. So, and again, I'll just remind you that there is that in that chat window, if you want to join us for that kits training webinar that's coming up later this week. Encourage you to be a part of that. And as always, if you have any other questions about how to use the software, just get in touch with us via our support email or a chat, and we're always happy to answer those questions and go deeper with you. So again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.